Today we're not going to be talking about cycling or unboxing anything new, but we're going to be talking about music, and specifically my introduction to it and how I gradually discovered connections between the various artists that I grew attached to. The first album I ever bought was this one. It's very familiar, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars by David Bowie, with that iconic image of Ziggy dressed in a jumpsuit, standing on a sultry corner on rain-soaked streets in London, England. The first time I heard the album was when I was on holiday. My school took my year in 1972 on a camping holiday in Europe. We camped in France, Belgium, Germany, Italy, and we went in 2 minibuses, and the driver of the minibus I was in turned out to be a David Bowie fan, and he had that album playing on cassette tape throughout the entire journey. And I was stunned. Up till then, I'd only really listened to simple pop songs on the radio. I was 14 years old, by the way. Raging heterosexual, and yet I was drawn to this strange music, this weird world that Bowie had created, a man who had simply fallen from space to Earth and had come to save the youth at a time when Earth's future was extremely uncertain and possibly only had 5 years left. The album stunned me, lyrically and musically, and I still play it to this day. I have numerous copies on vinyl and CD, different mixes, but it's beautiful. The following year, in 1973, I went to see a band called Mott the Hoople. It was my first ever gig, and their first 4 albums had really failed to achieve sales success. And on the point of splitting up, David Bowie offered them the song All the Young Dudes. Ian Hunter immediately knew that this was a song for Mott the Hoople. It turned out to be an anthem for a disaffected generation of youth, and propelled Mott the Hoople and Ian Hunter into the public eye. They went from cult status to overnight sensations, all because of David Bowie's All the Young Dudes. His own version of which, I have to say, is a little on the weak side. It's definitely a Mott song. When I saw them, they had just released the album Mott, and the following year, rather unoriginally, they released The Hoople. This one has The Golden Age of Rock and Roll, which was the big single, and Roll Away the Stone. I really preferred this one though, and this is a CD version. I have them all on vinyl as well, but this is a nice little replica of the original gatefold sleeve for the album Mott. This is the second album I ever bought. It turned out that a connection was already there, insofar as the guitarist for Bowie's band, the Spiders from Mars, was one Mick Ronson, a dour Yorkshireman from Hull, who transformed performed when he played guitar. He really was Ziggy, in my eyes. Mick Ronson is given a certain amount of credit for his involvement with David Bowie and huge contribution to the sound of the Spiders from Mars band, but his involvement went way deeper than the tone of his Gibson Les Paul. He taught himself to score orchestral music for the albums Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust, and became notable as an arranger in his own right. His connection with Mott the Hoople is that he became friends with Ian Hunter and would go on to feature on Hunter's eponymous debut album, which I bought in 1975. The plan had been for Ronson to join Mott the Hoople to replace departing guitarist Mick Ralphs, who was off to join Bad Company and would go on to enormous success with them. But tensions within the band Mott were such that they imploded, and Ronson never actually joined them, which is a shame. It would be nice to have seen how they fared with Ronson on guitar. Well, I suspect. I was lucky enough to see Mott the Hoople live in 1973 at the Bournemouth Winter Gardens. And who should be the supporting act but a certain Queen? Yes, Brian May, Freddie Mercury, Roger Taylor and John Deacon. They had already had 2 albums out by this time, but weren't hitting the big time. Ian Hunter invited them to tour with Mott the Hoople, and that gig, my first ever at age 15, remains one of my treasured memories. Queen released Sheer Heart Attack that year, and the single Killer Queen brought them to the public's attention. The following year they released this, which is probably their most famous album, A Night at the Opera. At least a decade later, Queen would steal the show at the Live Aid concert at Wembley Arena, brainchild of one Bob Geldof, where, to continue the connections, David Bowie joined them on stage for vocals on the single Under Pressure. But a connection with another very important band from my youth is that Status Quo opened the concert. They performed an energetic 4-song set, which I still enjoy watching to this day. On a subsequent album, In the Army Now, Quo performed a cover of Ian Hunter's track Speechless. As far as I can tell, that's the only real connection between those 2 bands. But another major connection with the second band I ever saw live, which was the incredible Supertramp, who performed Crime of the Century live in 1975 and interspersed it with several tracks from their upcoming album Crisis or What Crisis? That album was recorded at Trident Studios and produced by the legendary Ken Scott, who went on to produce 4 Supertramp albums. But it's worth noting that he also produced the first 4 David Bowie albums. The band Queen would, somewhat later, record the highly successful single Bohemian Rhapsody at the selfsame Trident Studios. We all know that sadly Freddie Mercury succumbed to AIDS. Well, in 1992, the remaining band members, Brian May, Roger Taylor and John Deacon, arranged a memorial concert and invited various dignitaries from the rock and pop world to join them on stage. The concert finale was all the young dudes, with Ian Hunter singing, Mick Ronson on guitar. Sadly, that was to be almost the last public performance by the great Mick Ronson. He died from cancer just a few months later. But I can still watch that gig and regard it as a veritable who's who of Paul's favourite rock bands from the 70s.